We're back for Chapter 7 of Alice in Wonderland, and tonight we are reading Mad Tea Party. It's a very famous scene. I would like to have a mad tea party. Actually, later tonight, I am told I will be having peppermint tea with dinner. I'm not much of a tea drinker. I'm more of a coffee person, but I've had this peppermint tea before, and it's quite good, so I'm looking forward to it. Chapter 7, A Mad Tea Party. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice, only, as it's asleep, I suppose it won't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. "No room! No room!" they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly. She sat down on a large armchair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," the March Hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. "I don't see any wine," she remarked. "But there isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it," said Alice angrily. "It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's laid out for a great many more than three." "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. "You should learn not to make personal remarks," Alice said with some severity. "It's very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, "Why is Raven like a writing desk?" "Come, we shall have some fun now," thought Alice. "I'm glad they've begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that," she added aloud. "Do you mean you think you can find out the answer to it?" said the March Hare. "Exactly so," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," the March Hare went on. "I do," Alice hastily replied. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know." "Not the same thing a bit," said the Hatter. "Why, you might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I say. Eat what I see." "You might just as well say," added the March Hare, "that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like." "You might just as well say," added the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe." It is the same thing with you," said the Hatter, and here the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a minute, while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. Here's a picture of all of them sitting down at the tea party. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. "What day of the month is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little and said, "The 4th. "2 days wrong," said the Hatter. "I told you butter wouldn't suit the works," he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. "It was the best butter," said the March Hare meekly. "Yes, but some crumbs must have gotten into it as well," the Hatter grumbled. "You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife." The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily. Then he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again. But he could think of nothing better to say than his first remark. "It was the best butter, you know." Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. "What a funny watch," she remarked. "It tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is." "Why should it?" muttered the Hatter. "Does your watch tell you what year it is?" "Of course not," Alice replied very readily. "But that's because it stays the same year for such a long time altogether." "Which is just the case with mine," said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to her to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. "I don't quite understand you," she said as politely as she could. "The Dormouse is asleep again," said the Hatter, and he poured a little hot tea onto its nose. The Dormouse shook its head impatiently and said without opening its eyes, Of course. Just what I was going to remark myself." "Have you guessed the riddle yet?" the Hatter said, turning to Alice again. "No, I give up," Alice replied. "What's the answer?" "I haven't the faintest idea," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you might do something better with the time, she said, than wasting it in asking riddles that have no answers. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him. I don't know what you mean, said Alice. Of course you don't, the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you never even spoke to time. Perhaps not, Alice cautiously replied. But I know I have to beat time when I learn music. Ah, that accounts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand beating. Now, if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock. For instance, suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling. 1:30. Time for dinner. I only wish it was, said the March Hare to itself in a whisper. That would certainly be grand, said Alice thoughtfully. But then I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you like. Is that the way you manage it? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I, he replied. We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. It was the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder where you're at. You know the song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter continued, in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea-tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Here the dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep. Twinkle, 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 and went on so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen bawled out, He's murdering the time! Off with his head! How dreadfully savage, said Alice. And ever since that, the Hatter went on in mournful tone, he won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came into Alice's head. Is that the reason so many tea things are put out here, she asked. Yes, that's it, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time. And we've no time to wash the things between whiles. Then you keep moving around, I suppose, said Alice. Exactly so, said the Hatter, and the things get used up. But when you come back to the beginning again, Alice ventured to ask. Suppose we change the subject, the March Hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then the dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up the dormouse, and they pinched it on both sides at once. The dormouse slowly opened his eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you fellows were saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, added the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters, the dormouse began in a great hurry, and their names were Elsie, Lacie, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Said Alice, who always took a great interest in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on treacle, said the dormouse, after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, Alice gently remarked. They'd have been ill. So they were, said the dormouse, very ill. Alice tried a little to fancy to herself what such an extraordinary way of living would be like, but it puzzled her too much, so she went on, But why did they live at the bottom of a well? Take some more tea, the March Hare said to Alice very earnestly. I've had nothing yet, Alice replied in an offended way, so I can't take more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more than nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, said Alice. Who's making personal remarks now? The Hatter said triumphantly. Alice did not quite know what to say to this, so she helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, and then turned to the dormouse and repeated her question. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said, It was a treacle well. There's no such thing! Alice was beginning very angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare went on. Shh, shh! The dormouse sulkily remarked, If you can't be civil, you'd better finish the story yourself. No, please go on, Alice said very humbly. I won't interrupt you again. I dare say there may be one. One indeed, said the dormouse indignantly. However, he consented to go on. And so these 3 little sisters, they were learning to draw, you know. What did they draw? Said Alice, quite forgetting her promise. Treacle, said the dormouse, without considering it all this time. "I want a clean cup," interrupted the Hatter. "Let's all move one place on." He moved as they spoke, and the Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who got any advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse off than before, as the March Hare had just upset the milk jug onto his plate. Alice did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously. "But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from?" "You can draw water out of a well," said the Hatter, "so I think you should just draw treacle out of a treacle well, eh? Stupid!" "But they were in the well," Alice said to the Dormouse, not choosing to notice that last remark. "Of course they will," said the Dormouse. "Well in." This answer so confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go on for some time without interrupting it. "They were learning to draw," the Dormouse went on, yawning and rubbing its eyes, for it was getting very sleepy. "And they drew all manner of things, everything that begins with an M." "Why with an M?" said Alice. "Why not?" said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes by this time and was going off in a doze, but on being pinched by the Hatter, it woke up again with a little shriek and went on. "That begins with an M, such as mousetraps and the moon and memory and munchness. You know, they say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of a muchness?" "Really, now you ask me," said Alice, very much confused. "I don't think—" "Then you shouldn't talk," said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear, so she got up in great disgust and walked off. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took the least notice of her going, though she looked back once or twice, half hoping they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. Makes as much sense as anything else. Here is a picture of that happening, them trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. They're all quite mad. In this context, my American friends, mad does not mean angry, mad means crazy time. As in, cuckoo for Cocoa Pops. Bonkers. Meanwhile, "At any rate, I'll never go there again," said Alice, as she picked her way through the wood. "It is the stupidest tea party I ever was at in all my life." "And yet you kind of want to go, don't you? I know I do. My whole life, ever since I read this when I was a kid, for the first time, I've always wanted to go to this tea party and do these crazy things and be with these loony people and animals and listen to them talk. And I don't think I would put the Dormouse in the teapot, but I would do something. There'd be shenanigans." Sorry, editorial remarks. You get what you pay for. Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. That's also cool. Editorial remark. "That's very curious," she thought, "but everything's curious today. I think I may as well go in at once." And then she went. Once more she found herself in the long hall, and close to the little glass table. "Now I'll manage better this time," she said to herself, and began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that led into the garden. Then she set to work nibbling at the mushroom she had kept a piece in her pocket, till she was about a foot high. Then she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful garden, among the bright flower beds and the cool fountains. So after all that, she finally found her way back, and she had what she needed to get the golden key, and to get to be the right size to go through the door to get to the garden. And the next chapter, chapter 8, is the Queen's croquet ground. But the golden key reminds me of a story, so you'll get a bonus story tonight. And if you don't care about the bonus story, you can click the stop button on the YouTube thing and just go do whatever else you're doing. You can go brush your teeth, or you can go to sleep. Do whatever. It's up to you. You have that. Freedom. YouTube freedom. Where are we on now? Chapter 8. Next time will be chapter 8. The Queen's croquet ground. But I'm going to tell you a story about another golden key. Magic key, which is a funny story. Years ago, many years ago, when I was in my teens and early 20s, my summer job was to be the arts and crafts counselor at a day camp in Massachusetts. And my official job title was Mr. Art Man. I think that was possibly the best job title I've ever had in my life. And I worked with young children from Different years I work with different age kids, but this one summer I was working with kids from age about 5 up to about 8 doing arts and crafts projects. And some days we would do things that were more complicated, and sometimes when we ran out of supplies or we're just doing stuff, we would just draw. And sometimes kids need an idea of what to draw, because if you just tell them to draw, some of them will always have something in their mind. Some of them have a great imagination and can go, and they'll always have something in their mind. Some kids need a little help coming up with an idea of something to draw. And I don't like reading to kids from children's books that are illustrated when that is the case, because then they feel like they have to compete with professional adult children's book illustrators. And that's not fair, because I can't compete with them, and because I'm not a children's book illustrator. And so 5, 6, 7-year-old kids, when they try to make the pictures match really nice pictures in books, sometimes get frustrated. So what we would do is we would tell stories. Sometimes we would read from books that didn't have pictures. But most books for little kids have pictures, and so all the kids would be like, "Show me the picture," and you can't not do that. They bite you and they hit you with things. So sometimes what we would do instead of that is we would go outside if it was nice, and we'd burn off some energy, because they gave these kids sugar, they gave them juice and cookies and whatnot, and then all these kids would be vibrating, because I don't know if you know this, but the definition of a child is a machine that turns sugar into energy and emergency room bills. There you go. Anyways, actually noise and emergency room bills, that's what it is, and some energy is in there somewhere. There's a PV equals nRT or something. Anyways, so sometimes what we would do is I would take a group of kids, usually about 15 or 20 kids, and we would go outside and we would pretend to do some kind of adventure, and run around, work off some excess energy, and we would have an hour total for this arts and crafts thing. And so we'd go outside and goof off for outside and run around for, say, 15 or 20 minutes and do a little story. And then we would go inside and we would illustrate the adventure that we just had, because that gave them a chance to kind of blow off some steam. And then we would go inside and we would do this. And I promise we'll get to the key. The story is about the key. But again, as I've said several times, you get what you pay for. You can stop this at any time. So if you think I'm going long here, you can fast forward to the end and knock yourself out. Anyway, so this one time we were doing some sort of insane adventure, and we were all with these crazy pants. I mean, it's me. It was just goofy stuff. We were jumping, we were riding giant hamsters over the Grand Canyons. We're leaping, we're doing things. But at some point, there's some magic castle, and there's a bridge and whatever. And then we need a key. We need magic keys. You have to have a magic key to get into the magic castle, because of course you do. And all of this is imaginary. We're just running around. It's a bunch of 6-year-olds and me running around with a couple of other counselors, getting sweaty in the summer, and trying to unload some of this juice and cookies energy that smarter people than I decided we should give these children. So we're running around, and we find this hoard of keys behind a rock. And again, remember, totally imaginary. So I pick up, as I'm showing you now, a double handful of magic keys. And I say, "All right, we've got the magic keys. We can get into the magic castle. Who wants a magic key?" And of course, all the kids say, "Me, me, me." So I'm handing out magic keys, exactly as I am now. I'm handing you the same exact magic key I handed to these 20 or so young people. So I'm handing out the magic keys. I say, "All right, great. Everybody got a magic key. Let's go to the castle." And as I was saying that, one of the little kids, I think his name was Oliver, says to me, "I didn't get one." So I'm like, "Okay, fine." And I'm going to hand him a key. And Oliver says to me, "Doug took 2. So I look at Doug, and I say, "Doug, did you take 2? And Doug looks up at me and he goes, I said, "All right, well, why don't you give one to Oliver?" He goes, and he gives one to Oliver, and Oliver goes, takes one like a little thing, and kind of looks at the other one like, they're kind of looking stink eye at each other. Then I'm like, "Has everybody got one now? We're all good? Okay, great." That's the power of imagination. That not only did Doug know that he had taken 2, but that Oliver saw him took 2, and that, or the other way around, whatever. One of the kids took 2 imaginary keys, the other one caught him at it, busted him for it, and then the other one copped to it. This is the power of imagination, also of guilt or something. I don't know if there's a moral in there. I just remembered that reading about the golden key tonight. So anyways, that's a little bonus for you tonight. Anyway, it's Sunday. I hope you had a good weekend. I hope you're all safe and well, and I hope you all have lovely, restful, and beautiful dreams. So take care, and we'll see you for the next chapter of Alice tomorrow night. Good night. Love you all.